Hello, and welcome to Illumining the Path with Professor Douglas Petrovich. Today is going to be a lot of fun for me because I get to share with you some of my original research that led to groundbreaking discoveries. It's related to the alphabet, the world's first alphabet. Before we launch into a discussion of the actual alphabet itself, I'd like to set the stage by talking about where it fits in chronologically in the ancient world. So as you look at this basic Israelite chronology chart that I have for you, there are only two dates that really are of importance to us. First, the more recent date, 1446 BC. That's the correct year for the Exodus. Yes, it's a disputed matter. It's a long discussion. We'll take up more of it in the future, but for now, just know that it's 1446 BC. That's the correct year. That's because 1446 BC is the 480th year before the construction began on Solomon's temple. If you look at the next to the bottom date here, 967 BC, we know that construction on the first temple began in 967 BC. Therefore, 479 years and some number of months before this takes us to 1446 BC. Then in Exodus 12, 40, and 41, it clearly says that the Israelites left Egypt 430 years to the very day after their arrival there. So the arrival of the Israelites in Egypt took place in 1876 BC. That's when Jacob moved his entire family to Egypt, and they never left until the Exodus. Now we can begin to talk about the world's oldest alphabetic script. I really want to give you a little bit more background here. It was probably invented around 1850 or so BC. That's not an exact year, that's a ballpark. Technically, I'm very confident in saying it's between 1859 BC and 1842 BC, so around 1850. The study of the earliest alphabet goes back to at least the third quarter of the 19th century, meaning before 1875. For all of these years since, scholars have been attempting to decipher the script. Virtually all scholars agree that the oldest alphabetic inscriptions in the world were composed with a Semitic language. You may ask, Dr. P, what are the Semitic languages? Well, there are many, but let me give you several examples. Amorite, Akkadian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Phoenician, and Edomite. Those are some of the ancient Semitic languages. Virtually all scholars who have studied the script have agreed that the world's oldest alphabetic script was taken directly from hieroglyphs in the Egyptian sign list. The sign list is comprised of over 800 different signs. Those are all pictographs, pictures of something. By 1916, Sir Alan Gardner, who is a very famous Egyptologist of the 20th century, reasonably established this as factual. A German scholar named Hubert Grimme in 1923 was the first scholar to suggest that Hebrew is the language of the original alphabet. The title of Grimme's book is in German, but the translation is Ancient Hebrew Inscriptions from Sinai. As for Grimme's work, it is plagued with errors. He did not have a proper understanding of all the necessary issues at the time, going back to the first part of the 20th century. For example, he did not identify the proper phonetic value for all of the pictographic letters. The phonetic value alludes to what sound is made when you see a certain pictographic alphabetic letter. This left Grimme's alphabet flawed. We can't rely upon his work. You've got to get the phonetic value of every letter correct if you're going to be able to decipher and translate the text of these early alphabetic writings. As for me, I took up the study of this script in 2012. It all started when I stumbled into evidence of the Israelite Exodus, or at least the era, the very year of the Exodus that's connected to the 10th plague on Egypt. That caused me to do a lot more study. Thankfully, I was a PhD candidate at the time at the University of Toronto, and that enabled me to have access to a world-class library. So I was able to research an amazing array of books, journal articles, and other resources. My first task was catching up on 150 years of scholarship. Since I really had pretty much no background in the world's oldest alphabet, I had to rely on a colleague named Brian Coles, a wonderful Australian who was teaching in New Zealand. He is one of the few people in the world at the time who was writing and researching and publishing on the topic of the world's first alphabetic script. He helped point me to a lot of the important resources I needed to acquire. I acquired those, I studied those, and I really spent an enormous amount of time catching up on 150 years of scholarship. Well, let me start by giving you 3 examples of the original alphabetic script. This will help you to see visually what it's like. The first inscription that I want to show you, it's called Sinai 377. During the work of William Flinders Petrie, who is a famous Egyptologist and archaeologist considered to be the father of Egyptian archaeology, he did excavational work at a site in Sinai called Serebit el-Khadim. While there, among his discoveries, and he made many, one of them was an inscription called Sinai 377. Actually, Sinai 377 is not located on site at Serebit el-Khadim. That is the location of turquoise mines in antiquity. But instead, it's near Wadi Nasib, a local water source. Actually, Wadi Nasib represents the place of a subterranean water source, a well. Sinai 377 is the world's oldest attested fully alphabetic inscription. It was composed in Hebrew on what's called a stelliform. A stela, if it were removed from bedrock, would look something like a tombstone from the 19th century. Sinai 377 doesn't appear on its own. Its stelliform is really a twin stelliform of a Middle Egyptian inscription that's dated up in the top in what's called the lunette. There is a very clear and legible Middle Egyptian dating formula, and that helps us to date it to the reign of Amenemhat III. On an absolute timeline, Sinai 377 dates to 1840 BC. This is the oldest alphabetic inscription. We'll talk more about it in a future video. Then the second example of the original alphabetic script that I want to show to you is called the Lahun Bilingual Ostracan. About 1881, the same man, Flinders Petrie, discovered the Lahun Bilingual Ostracan at the site of Lahun. Petrie immediately understood that alphabetic writing was inscribed onto it. The ostracan is datable by 2 means. First, it's diagnostic rim-shirred. If you look at the top of the pottery there, it's a little bit reddish, somewhat rounded. That is the rim. If we have a full rim and it's connected to part of the body, we can reconstruct what the original vessel in whole almost certainly would have looked like. This helps ceramicists to relative date pottery. So it's a very important diagnostic feature. That tells us that the inscription dates to the 12th dynasty, which is part of the Middle Kingdom. It's at a site that was reoccupied under Sesostris II, so it can't predate his reign. The ostracan was found in situ, in the context of other 12th dynasty finds, in the exact stratum that coincides with other objects of the 12th dynasty. The second way that we can date it with certainty is the dating formula that's on the first line. So this ostracan, looking at the top and the right, where the dating formula begins, says that this inscription is dated to the 29th year of the reign of the king. Only 2 kings reigned that long in the 12th dynasty, Sesostris III and Amenemhat III. For reasons that I explain and argue in my book, I'm convinced that it's Amenemhat III's reign that we're talking about here. This ostracan helps to solidify the conclusion that the alphabet and its origin goes back all the way to the 19th century BC. Then the third example of the original alphabetic script that I want to show to you is Sinai 357. And for this one, we have to go forward in time, several centuries actually, all the way to the 15th century BC. Late in 1904, William Flinders Petrie discovered Sinai 357 inside Mine L at the Serebit el-Khadim turquoise mining site, which is located in southwestern Sinai, where it remains in situ to this very day. I've seen it with my own eyes. In fact, all 3 of these inscriptions I have seen with my own eyes. Petrie dated the pottery on the floors of all of these mines to the New Kingdom. We're talking about the lifetime of Moses. We've moved past the Middle Kingdom and the Second Intermediate Period, and now we're talking about the New Kingdom, the 18th dynasty. Petrie dated the pottery on the floors of the mines to the reigns of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II. Probably this means the first half of the 15th century BC, although it's possible that the date actually bleeds into the second half of the 15th century BC. This inscription essentially looks like an English capital L, but it doesn't read from top to bottom and then left to right as you would expect an L to read. It reads starting with the bottom line horizontally from right to left and then top to bottom. I'll show you why that's true in a future video. For now, though, just note that this demonstrates that the inventors of the alphabet resided in Egypt for centuries, actually from the 19th century to the 15th century BC. That's around 400 years, if not more. And that fits perfectly. So that's the third example of the original alphabetic script. Then we come to this question. What is the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic inscriptions? Sir Alan Gardner, who is also a very famous Egyptologist of the 20th century, the best linguist of the Egyptian language, wrote this in the introduction to a journal article that he published in 1916. He said this, "Until recently, Phoenician was held by most scholars to have been the actual parent whence the Greek and the Sabaean, with their offshoots and its own, ultimately spring." What he's saying is, only recently did we understand that the previously held concept that Phoenician is the source of the alphabetic inscriptions and all of the alphabetic scripts that exist. Now we know differently. Then Gardner wrote this in his conclusion. The common parent of the Phoenician, the Greek, and the Sabaean may have been one out of several more or less plastic local varieties of alphabet, all developing on the acrophonic principle under the influence of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. I'll talk more about the acrophonic principle, which is the basis of the invention of the alphabet, but I'll talk about it in a future video. Even in Gardner's day, which is 110 years ago from the moment I'm speaking, they realized that Phoenician is not the source of the alphabet. That's not the language with which the alphabet was created. One other argument that Gardner proved in his article is that even though the alphabet was founded by Asiatic Semites, it was created in Egypt, not in Asia, not in the Levant. You may ask, how do we really know that Phoenician wasn't the parent language of the alphabet? There are three problems with calling it the parent language. Number one, the oldest Phoenician inscription dates only back to late in the 10th century BC. That's the 10th century BC, the oldest Phoenician inscription. That's very recent in comparison to the alphabetic inscriptions we looked at. Number two, the alphabetic Ugaritic script, which does not even use pictographic letters, is attested on inscriptions from the 13th century BC, thus predating Phoenician by a whopping 3 centuries. To help you understand this, I want you to look at several different inscriptions that will help you to see what's the issue here. If you look on the far left, this is a proto-alphabetic inscription, like we've been looking at. It's horizontal. It's even scored to show that it's horizontal. It reads right to left, top to bottom, so it starts in the upper right. This is a New Kingdom inscription, like Sinai 357 that we were looking at, so it dates to the 15th century BC. Those are all pictographic alphabetic letters. Then look in the middle. That's the alphabetic Ugaritic inscription. It dates to around 1250 BC. Look how its script is written. The author of this inscription used cuneiform wedge shapes. They go back all the way to Mesopotamia, actually to the Jemdet Nasser period in Mesopotamian archaeological periodization, but this is not written in Akkadian. Most inscriptions that are composed with wedge shapes, and actually that's an ancient stylus that was used, are written in Akkadian. This is not Akkadian. This is using the way that you write Akkadian, but instead writing it in a different way with alphabetic letters. All of the alphabetic letters were converted into wedge shapes, combination of wedge shapes to represent the different alphabetic letters. Then look on the right. This is an ancient alphabetic inscription that's in Phoenician. Notice how it compares with the inscription on the far left, the alphabetic inscription. For example, if you look at the top row, there's a letter there in a red box. It looks like a plus sign. Compare that with the alphabetic Phoenician on the far right. That's the same letter, except the pitch is different and it looks more like an X. but it's the very same letter. Then go back to the alphabetic inscription on the left. Look at the green letters. Those are shepherd's staffs. They're upright staffs. You can see how it resembles a shepherd's staff. Then go to the alphabetic Phoenician inscription. Look for the green letters there. That's the same letter, but you can see that number one, the bend of the handle of the staff is no longer visible as a bend. It's a hard point, and this is indicative of the loss of a certain amount of the pictographic value of the original alphabetic letter. So it's less like a picture and it's more abstract. This is a natural development. Over time, the slow writing of the careful pictures turns into a faster writing of the more abstract letters. And then the final example there, look in the blue. You can see two blue letters in the alphabetic inscription on the left. Those look like a W that has lots of curve all the way to it. But then on the far right in the Phoenician inscription, it's all with jagged points. It looks like a W. That's the very same letter. It lost its curves. It lost some of its pictographic value. I'll talk more about what that letter actually is in a future video. Here's the deal. Looking at the Phoenician inscription, and it only dates back to 800, and the oldest inscription we have dates to like 925, 950 BC, roughly in that area. How can you have alphabetic inscriptions that look like the Phoenician one, and Phoenician is the source, but our oldest inscription only goes back to around the middle of the 10th century BC, whereas 3 centuries earlier, you have Ugaritic alphabetic that doesn't even use pictographic alphabetic letters. It uses wedge shapes. So you cannot explain the existence of alphabetic Ugaritic with the evidence we have of Phoenician. Then, the third problem with calling Phoenician the parent language of the alphabetic script is that the oldest alphabetic inscription, which does use pictographic letters, dates to the middle of the 19th century BC, thus predating Phoenician inscriptions by an entire 9 centuries. There's no way that Phoenician can be the source language if the script was invented by Semitic speakers in Egypt 9 centuries earlier. These are some of the reasons why Alan Gardner was convinced in his day, and other scholars as well, that Phoenician can't be the parent language of the alphabet. Let's move to a discussion of the sites with the earliest alphabetic writing. Where do we find them? Well, there are 4 sites that contain the earliest alphabetic writings in history. 1, Wadi Nasib, and that's located in southwestern Sinai, the site of Sinai 377 that dates to 1840 BC. 2, Wadi el-Hol. Let's go back to Egypt. It's to the west. Look near the bottom. You see that little bend in the Nile River where it says Kana Bend? In the center of that is the site. It's actually a military outpost called Wadi el-Hol. That's where Egyptian soldiers guarded Egypt's southern border. Then the third site is also in Egypt. Go to the north, follow the Nile River, and between the Nile River and what says el-Fayum, that's the Fayum, the breadbasket of Egypt, we'll talk more about that in a future video, there is a site called Lahun. That's the site where the alphabetic, actually the bilingual alphabetic inscription, the Lahun bilingual ostracan, was discovered. Lahun also happens to be the site where Joseph moved immediately after he was elevated to second in command in Egypt. Then the fourth site with the earliest alphabetic writing is Serbi el-Khadim, located very close to Bir Nasib. This is the site of this lucrative turquoise mining industry that made Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, very wealthy. Next, I want to give you a summary of the discovery that I fell into that Hebrew is indeed the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic script. My research looking into the evidence for Israelites in Egypt at the very site where Jacob settled, which is the site of Avaris, led to the unanticipated discovery that the language of the inventors of the world's oldest alphabetic script is Hebrew, the very language that is the ancestor of the Hebrew spoken by Jews of today. After resolving the phonetic value of the disputed letters among the 22-letter alphabet, I deduced the pictographic origin of each of the original 22 Hebrew letters. I then translated 15 proto-consonantal Hebrew inscriptions that date between 1840 and 1446 BC, the year of the Exodus. The term I use there, proto-consonantal. Proto means first. Consonantal means it consists only of consonants. So it's the script that provides the first alphabetic letters, which are all consonants. Within this corpus, 3 of the inscriptions actually name biblical figures. Here are the biblical figures named in those 15 inscriptions. Number 1, Asnath. Her name is on Sinai 376. She is the wife of Joseph, and her name appears in Genesis 41 and chapter 46 as well. The second person who's named is a man named Ahisamach. His name appears on Sinai 375a. Probably, unless you've memorized the Bible and remember all that you've memorized, you've never even heard this name before. He was the father of Aholiab. Aholiab is one of the 2 men whom God appointed to build the tabernacle in the desert after the Exodus. This is where God would live among his people. So these were 2 craftsmen, Aholiab being one of them. His father is mentioned on an inscription, Sinai 375a. His name is found in Exodus 31, 35, and 38. And third, oddly enough, and I didn't plan it this way, and I certainly didn't manipulate any of the evidence to fit a view I already had, Moses himself is mentioned on Sinai 361. He, of course, is the leader appointed by God, the man who led the Israelites out of Egypt and subsequently composed the first 5 books of the Bible that we know of as the Pentateuch. Let's talk for a moment about the publicizing and the disseminating of the research. And this took place between 2016 and 2021. Well, it begins with the publication of my book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, the subtitle, Hebrew as the Language of the Proto-Consonantal Script. That's where I document the process of my discovery and walk through all 15 inscriptions very carefully in great detail to show you how they're to be deciphered, translated, and understood. This book was published officially in 2016, but it actually didn't hit the bookstands until the beginning in January of 2017. As for the disseminating of the research, I have to bring in a Christian filmmaker named Timothy Mahoney. In 2014, Tim Mahoney put out the first of a series of films called Patterns of Evidence. The first film, the 2014 film, focused on the event of the Exodus itself, asking the question, do we have any evidence for it, and when did it take place? Mahoney planned to have his second film focus on the site of Mount Sinai, where that was located, what region it was in, what are the various views of it, and so forth. That was going to be his second film. But then he heard about the publication of my book. He got a copy, he started to read it, and he realized, I need to put the brakes on that film and put in a different film second. That led to the creation of his second film in the series Patterns of Evidence that he called The Moses Controversy. The question with that film was, is Moses truly a historical figure or just a literary construct? Do we have any evidence of Moses? Then a third question he asked was there a Hebrew script already in existence for Moses to use to compose the first 5 books of the Bible? This film came out in 2019. I appeared in this film, and this gave a platform for the research that I had done to demonstrate that Hebrew indeed is the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic script. Then, in 2021, I published the companion volume to the world's oldest alphabet. Its title is Origins of the Hebrews, the subtitle, New Evidence of Israelites in Egypt from Joseph to the Exodus. This was published in Nashville by New Creation. In this book, I document the whole plethora of types of evidence of Israelites in Egypt for the 430 years that the Bible says they sojourned in the land of Egypt. This is the first book ever attempted of its kind to offer such evidence. And really, I think there is a preponderance of evidence. So if you get the opportunity, read through this book, you will be amazed at how much evidence of Israelites in Egypt there actually is. One of the arguments that I attempt to make in the book, Origins of the Hebrews, is to connect the world's oldest alphabet to actual Israelite individual people who happen to be figures in the Bible itself. So let's now focus on connecting the Israelites to the first alphabetic script. between 1876 and 1842 BC. If you look at the site of Avaris, it's located in the northeastern sector of the Egyptian Nile Delta, just to the south of the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. The site covers more than 165 hectares. In fact, that makes it the largest of all ancient Near Eastern sites. It was massive, and that's where the Israelites lived. It's about 40 miles or 65 kilometers to the northeast of Cairo, in an area that the Bible calls the land of Goshen, per Genesis 45:10. During most of the second millennium BC, Avaris was known for its connecting of Asia to Africa, both by sea and land, because this city controlled the primary flow of traffic and commerce between these two great continents. In fact, Avaris was the conduit. Virtually all of the trading that took place between Asia and Africa went through the city of Avaris. That's exactly where God put the Israelites. There was no more strategic location in all of Africa than the site of Avaris. Let's zoom in at Avaris to a part of the site called Area R1. That's where the Egyptians resided at the time of Jacob and his family. If you look at the red box there in the shape of a rectangle, there archaeologists uncovered a temple. If we zoom in and look at a plan of the temple, we see that in the bottom area in the dark black, that's the actual temple and the parts of its sanctuary. But if you look directly above the paved walkway that's above the temple, you see there an outer court. If you take a left turn there, you'll enter a room where archaeologists discovered a stela. That, of course, is a stone that contains an ancient inscription. This inscription is known as the Esbet Rushdi stela. In a future video, I'll tell you all about the Esbet Rushdi stela, but I want to limit it today to what sets us up for identifying who are the inventors of the alphabet. If you look at what I have in the red box on the drawing of the inscription, you'll see that there are 4 hieroglyphs there. It reads right to left. It's horizontal. There's a head on the right. To its left above is a mouth that makes the R, the R sound, and below it is a house. Then to the left is a man with his arms raised. Now I want to mention a few things about this. First of all, the inscription commemorates an accomplishment that was made between the Egyptians and the Asiatics who were there at the site. These, of course, are the Israelites. In the third from the bottom line, in the row that's the third from the bottom, right about the middle, you see a seated man with a bowl raised over his head. That's where we begin to get the autobiographical signature, if you will, of the author of the inscription. He gives himself 2 titles here and 2 names here. It's not uncommon, it's not implausible in Egypt to have more than 1 name. Every pharaoh had at least 5 names. Not 1, not 2, 5 names. The first title here, it reads Heri Per, which means head of the household. Head of the household. That's a term that can be a technical term for an office in Egypt that refers to a person who handles the king's house. That's a very important role. It's a very high position to possess. Not every head of the household oversees Pharaoh's household, but this head of the household has a hieroglyph that's a determinative, has no phonetic value. It's the one on the far left, the man standing with the arms raised. The determinative that's not expected here. We would expect a seated man. If you look further to the right on that line, almost all the way, but not quite all the way, you see a man seated down with one arm kind of pointed diagonally upward and one pointed down to the ground. That's a seated man. That's what we expect. In fact, always when you see a Heri Per, a head of the household, you will see a seated man determinative. But this determinative is used of someone either who's very tall, or someone giving praise, or someone who's very high, not necessarily in a literal sense like a tall person, but figuratively. He has a high position. That, I'm convinced, is what's being used here. This is the head of a household who is very high. So this most likely is a reference to the king himself. This is the head of the king's household. I want you to notice one more thing. Look at the house there. Do you see the shape of it? First of all, the bottom horizontal line, that's like ground level, it has a cut in it in the middle. That's to represent the doorway. Then, look at the shape of the overall house. It's square. This, folks, is taboo. Egyptian scribes consistently, all the time, wrote the house hieroglyph, this hieroglyph, with a horizontal house, not a square house. This is absolutely breaking the rules that you never break as a scribe. But this is not necessarily an official Egyptian document put out by the king. It's not an Egyptian scribe who's writing this. It's someone different. Sa-Sobek, that's one of his names, and Horemheb Jr., the king of the gods, is at the forefront. This is a person who puts the king of the gods at the forefront. That's why he received this name. But our purpose is to focus on this title, head of the household. So remember that as we move forward. This inscription has a date to tell us exactly when it was composed. Top right, you see the blue box. That says renal year. And at the bottom of those hieroglyphs, there are 5 vertical strokes. That tells us it's renal year 5. It's the year of the reign of some king, and it's his year number 5. So it's after 4 years, but less than a full 5 years. Who is the king? Look at the green box on the next line on the left end. Senwosret, known to us usually as Sesostris. This is Sesostris III. I will be attempting to prove to you in a future video that Sesostris III is the famine pharaoh of Joseph's day. I'll also attempt to prove to you that his reign on the throne actually began in the very year of transition, at the end of the 7 years of abundance, at the beginning of the first 7 years of famine. So we are 4+ years into the famine. And when we look at the translation of the inscription, we know for sure it makes perfect sense that there would be a nationwide crisis, such as a famine. But that's for another day. Now we want to move our attention to the actual inventors themselves. But let's start with the biblical text because I want you to see the tie-in, the connection, the continuity between the two. For this, we need to look at Genesis 47:11, 27 and 28a, then 48, 1 and 2. It says this, my translation. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land and the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Now Israel lived in the land of Egypt, in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. In a future video, we'll come back to that. That's a really important statement. Then it goes on. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So if he moved there in 1876, that means he died in 1859. Remember that year. Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, and Joseph is at a different location. He's either at Lahoun or at Dashur. That's for another time. It says this, take note. So someone said this to Joseph. Take note, your father is sick. So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. By the way, those are the 2 oldest sons, Manasseh being the very oldest son of Joseph, Ephraim being the second oldest son of their father. Then it goes on, when it was told to Jacob, look, your son Joseph has come to you. Israel, that is Jacob, collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Put special attention on what's in blue there. So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. They went to see their uncles and their grandfather. How many times had they seen him before? We don't really know, but they were a part of this trip, and they would become vital to the trip. So we move on to Genesis 48, 3 through 6. It says this, Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, you see, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of people, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Just to pause for a moment, this is a promise God made to Jacob before he left Canaan. He said, this is the land of promise. God knew that Jacob would be leaving Canaan now into Egypt, and he would die there. So he renewed that promise, the same promise that God made to Abraham and to Isaac. This is a renewal of the Abrahamic covenant. It demonstrated that all of Jacob's offspring are part of this covenant. Then we go on. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them will be yours. Now we're returning back to Ephraim and Manasseh. They will be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Notice what Jacob does here. He uses the second-born's name first. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine. What was this? What took place here? I used to think in my naive days that this is like a picture on a wall. This only would come of importance when the Israelite people moved into Canaan and experienced the distribution of a land that they had conquered. And there the tribal allotments would be given, and Ephraim would be given this land, and Manasseh would be given this land, and the other sons of Jacob would be given these lands, and so forth. No, this is different. This, folks, is thievery. And patriarchs, especially in the East, this isn't the West, patriarchs can do this. Their word is law with their family. No questions, no complaining, no juntas, no overtaking the patriarch. His word is followed, and that's that. So what does he say? Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine. He was removing them physically from their mother and father. They had to move among their uncles. And this, folks, was one of the greatest strokes of genius in world history. Without this stroke of genius, we probably would not be able to read the script that we read today. At least somebody else would have had to give us the alphabet that we have. This was Jacob taking Joseph's 2 eldest sons away from him, helping his other sons to be able to live in Egypt, because Ephraim and Manasseh were born and raised in Egypt. That was their first language. That's their native culture. They understand everything about the Egyptian culture, including its religion. Now we want to turn our attention to part of the land where the Israelites actually resided. It's to the west-southwest of area R1 where the Egyptians were. This is area F1, and the part of area F1 that was excavated the most is in that red box on the far left of this drawing of Avaris. Then as we zoom in a little bit more, we see some amazing architectural design. This, folks, is astounding. It is truly a mansion. It is room after room after room, owned by Asiatics. When the excavators first were working there, in their publications, they called it a palace. But if it's going to be a palace, there's one thing that it always has to have. That is a throne room. This building, though, has no throne room. It's not a kingly mansion. It's the mansion of rich people who are Asiatic, not native Egyptian. The archaeologists actually took 40 years to excavate this building, and they didn't excavate all of it. It's an amazing piece of construction. But our focus is in the graveyard. Look at that red rectangle. Inside there, we see a tomb. It's a tomb of a man named Di Sobek-Amchat. What you're looking at mainly is the second Asiatic occupational phase. Jacob would have lived there with his family in the first Asiatic occupational phase. The second occupational phase has Egyptian influence, whereas the phase before it had virtually no Egyptian influence. In fact, all of this residence was built with Egyptian tools, Egyptian material, Egyptian architectural design, and they even found an Egyptian plumb bob that was in situ, located in its original context by the builders, who kept extending this building by adding more rooms all the time. This is in stratum D 1.1, and I refer to it affectionately as the EAR, E-A-R, the Egyptianized Asiatic residence. If we zoom in now on that tomb, this is the burial tomb of Di Sobek-Amchat. We'll return to that in a minute. If you look in the upper left of the 4 chambers, the 4 burial chambers there, the one in the northern chamber is the one that's important to our purposes today. This is the burial chamber of the main occupant, a male. He would have been a very, very important figure at the site, not only among his family. If we look in that northern chamber, we see bones and a number of material finds that actually reflect great wealth. For our purposes, the one that's of importance is number 3, the amethyst scarab and golden ring. Here is an electronic drawing I made of the photograph after it was discovered by archaeologists. This will help you see the hieroglyphs clearer. This basically is similar to a signature. This gives your sign. Like 100 years ago, 300 years ago, when people would sign a document, or people would write a document, they'd roll it up, and they'd put a piece of hot wax on there, and then they would take their seal, press it in, and then remove it. That left their mark, their seal. This is how the signet ring served this person, di sobek emchat. And we actually can read this. There's a part that's broken on the top, but we can reconstruct it based on something we can learn from textual evidence down in Sinai, because people who lived here at Avaris participated in the expeditions to extract turquoise down at Sirbi el-Khadim. The inscription reads, Cheka en rechenu di sobek emchat, which translates to the ruler of retinue, di sobek emchat. What is retinue? That's the Egyptian name for the whole area of what we call the Levant, ancient Syria, Phoenicia below it to the west, especially on the coast, and then the southern Levant, ancient Canaan. That doesn't mean that he ruled there. It means that his family derived from there. His name is di sobek emchat, he whom sobek emchat appointed. That's what his name means. So whoever sobek emchat is, he has to be more important than this person, because the fact that he's called a cheka means that he's the ruler here. He's in charge. I suppose the best comparison we have is mayor. He's the mayor of the city of Avaris. He's the head honcho in his day, in that second Asiatic occupational phase. Now we turn to the site of Sirbi el-Khadim, where we're going to see a connection to the ruler of Retinue. Sirbi el-Khadim is one of several turquoise mining sites in southwestern Sinai that were exploited in antiquity by the Egyptians, who traveled there on annual or occasional mining expeditions. These expeditions led to a lucrative industry that continued from dynasties 12 through 28 and began even earlier at the nearby site of Magharah. God used this industry as one of the ways by which he blessed the Israelites financially. There, we see that Asiatics and Egyptians worked in harmony on these expeditions going down to extract turquoise from these mines. The team that would go down to the turquoise mine to attempt to extract turquoise always left behind a written record of their expedition that year. During one of those such expeditions, they recorded Sinai 112. It's the inscription that you see here in front of you. There's Middle Egyptian text that comes down from the top, describing who was a part of it, what they did, what they accomplished, whatever they wanted to communicate, that's what they would write. During certain years, a certain individual who composed all of these stelae would draw a drawing at the bottom and usually write some type of caption to go with it. This was done on Sinai 112. And if we look at a drawing of the caption of Sinai 112, at the man on the donkey and the young men who are in front and behind, we can connect this to that signet scarab from Avaris. Because reading from right to left, this text reads, Sen en, cheka en, rechenu, chebededem, which means brother of, the ruler of Rechenu, and then his name, Chebeded, which has an optional M sound here. In other such inscriptions found at the site, oftentimes the final M sound, the final M, is not there. This is known as mimation. Hebrew is one of the Semitic languages that uses mimation, the optional use of a final M sound at the end of a word. Really, the root of the word is chebeded. If you remember from the signet scarab of di sobek emchat, the title was there, but most of it was missing. Parts of it are visible, such as the R mouth, part of the chik that makes the U sound, and the hieroglyph that makes the ch sound. That's enough to give us a pretty good understanding of what's there, and that matches perfectly with what we see in the brother of the ruler of Retinue. Because of the dating of the inscription, we know that these are contemporary. This suggests that it's his actual brother and that he had a title in relation to his brother. Therefore, the brother of the ruler of Retinue, we would expect, is the one of the two who is lesser. and his brother is greater. So the brother of the ruler of retinue had the dirtier job. The ruler, he was the mayor. He had to stay at the city. He could send his brother on this dusty trail that leads all the way down into the desert of Sinai to extract this turquoise. But what does his name mean, Chebeded? It's actually a passive participle, and it took me a long time to figure this out. Because in all of the onomastica, all of the books that give us the exhaustive lists of names of individuals from this era, Chebeded never appears. It's a passive participle that means he who was disfavored. He who was disfavored. Think about it. What happened to Manasseh when he went down with his father, Joseph, to see Jacob when Jacob was about to die? Jacob presented the birthright blessing, the really important blessing that usually goes to the firstborn. It should have gone to Manasseh as the firstborn son of Joseph. But Jacob instead put his right hand on Manasseh and put his left hand on Ephraim. This bothered Joseph greatly, and he said, Dad, no, the right hand goes on the older one. This is the older one. Jacob replied, yes, my son, and this is to paraphrase, of course. Yes, my son, he will be great, meaning Manasseh, but his brother will be greater. What happened to Manasseh at that moment? He lost favor. The birthright blessing that belonged to him was given to his younger brother, the second-born son. Devastating. This was humiliating. This man, Chebeded, the brother of the ruler of retinue, his name means he who was disfavored, the very thing that happened to Manasseh. In future videos, I'll do more to demonstrate how all of this fits together and show more evidence that he is Manasseh. For now, I just want you to know that he is the brother of the ruler of retinue, the lesser of the two, and that they are indeed in harmony with one another. They both have titles that involve the term ruler of retinue. Joseph, I'm actually in a future video going to be trying to prove to you that one of the names that he received is Sobek Em-Khat, which derives from two names that appear on that Esbet Rushdie stela that we didn't really talk about, but Sa Sobek is one, Khurram-Khat Jr. is the other. When you conflate the two, you take parts out of each name, make one name out of it, you end up with Sobek Em-Khat. That, folks, is Joseph. Therefore, when we look at the name Di Sobek Em-Khat, Ephraim, he whom Sobek Em-Khat appointed, how did he get his name? His name is connected to his appointment. Sobek Em-Khat appointed him. Who's Sobek Em-Khat? Joseph. Joseph is higher than he is. Joseph is the head of the household, the one who is the high up head of the household, the head of Pharaoh's household. That's who he is. Then Manasseh's name, Chebeded or Chebededem, means he who was disfavored. He is the brother of the ruler of retinue. I want to develop this connection even further. It's going to take us to the world's first alphabetic letter. The other site where they extract their turquoise, actually mostly earlier before Serebit el-Khadim, was Maghara. This site was exploited as early as Dynasty III. Its mines are visible today as gaping cavities in the landscape that were the result of ancient trenching for locating turquoise in the rock. One of the inscriptions, similar to Sinai 112 that we looked at before, is called Sinai 24a. This inscription also was composed by Chebeded. Notice what he writes on the far right. Look especially at those red boxes. To start lines, and by the way, to read hieroglyphics, you read from the direction to where the animals, people, or gods are looking. You can see all of them are looking to the right, which means we read from right to left. What we would expect to see is hieroglyphs that give us phonetic value. But what do we have? We have what I affectionately refer to as the touchdown hieroglyph. It looks like a referee signaling a 6-point touchdown in American football. This hieroglyph, remember, it's a determinative. It's only supposed to be used at the end of a word, not at the beginning and not in the middle. So what's it doing here? Why do we see it here? Look at the vertical stroke just to the left of the arm of the person with the raised arms. That stroke denotes that we take what's before it as a whole. It's called an ideogram. The hieroglyph represents an entire concept. And in this sense, it has to be something. What is that concept? This is similar to what we saw on the Esbet Rushdie stela, kind of bootleg hieroglyph composing. Egyptian scribes would never do this. Something is afoot. It has to be a person, though, because if you keep going to the left, you come to the seated man. You see that seated man there right above the bird of the next line below? That tells us that the intervening hieroglyphs give us the phonetic reading of a person. So that is a certain named person. That's a person who's related to or connected to the person with the raised arms. That doesn't make sense to us yet. There's one person on the expedition that's connected to this high up person. Look at the second line. There's another person that's connected to this high up person. Then look at the third line, a third person. So we have three people, three individuals, all named, who somehow relate to this high up person, this ideogram representing an entire concept, which is a person behind it. But what is that concept? By the way, before we move on, look at the year. This is year 2 of Amenemhat III, 1858 to 1857 BC. Two important events happened in 1859 BC. One, Amenemhat III came onto the throne with his father as a co-regent. 2, Jacob died. Aha, Jacob died. That's the same year that Ephraim and Manasseh were required to live among their uncles at Avaris. Now that should make sense, right? Here we are 1 to 2 years later, as this inscription shows us. This is Manasseh. Shortly after he arrives at Avaris, he immediately enters into this new lucrative industry of extracting turquoise to make money for the people who are there at Avaris and for the crown. And there's that funny hieroglyph on the far right. What does that mean? Let's go back to Sirbit el-Khadim. After the expedition of year 2 of Amenemhat III, 1858 or 1857 BC, Sirbit el-Khadim, the neighboring site, which really now was coming into its own as far as the site that Egyptians would go to most for getting their turquoise. There we see the same thing. Instead of horizontal inscriptions, though, with Sinai 90 in year 6 of Amenemhat III, we see vertical writings of these people. These are all individuals, once again, who are part of the expedition, all who are connected to this hieroglyph of the person with the raised arms. This time there are 8 individuals. But what does that mean? Now let's move forward a little bit further. Year 13 of Amenemhat III. Look in the upper right, Sinai 92. All of a sudden, we have a full writing of what was only written in brief with just the touchdown hieroglyph. Now we have hairy pair plus the touchdown hieroglyph, the man with the arms extended toward the sky. We have the same thing. Individuals who are part of the expedition who are people because of the seated man hieroglyph that's on the left end of each of those horizontal lines. What does this draw our mind to? It draws our mind back to the Esbet Rushdie Stela, where this very high up person, the head of the household, probably Pharaoh's household, who had 2 names and 2 titles, one of those titles was head of the household. That's what this is. What this is suggesting to us is the head of the household is a designation. It's a connection. It's someone that you are connected to that's going to demonstrate you have some kind of important value. That's the person you're connected to. Who is it? To whom are you connected? The head of the household, exactly as it's written on the Esbet Rushdie Stela of several decades earlier. What else do we have here? The exact same kind of writing of the house. We have a square instead of a rectangle. There is that open doorway, so that's normal Egyptian writing. But what's not normal is the square instead of the rectangle. Then look at the person below. That's a different person, but we also start with hairy pair, except this time the pair has no doorway. That again is taboo. You don't write this house hieroglyph without the open doorway. But this guy does it. By the way, this is Manasseh, the author of this inscription, Sinai 92. It is Chebeded, so that's Manasseh. He writes this exactly as Joseph wrote head of the household as his first title on the Esbet Rushdie Stela. What a phenomenal connection. You could say that house is a little bit more rectangular, true. But then look down to the bottom left at Sinai 32 in year 20-something of Amenemhat III. What do we have here? Hairy pair, and we have actually 2 houses. One rectangular, one that's more of a square, except it's not exactly a square. It's slightly vertically taller than it is wide. So once again, hairy pair is being written by Chebeded to designate this connection with the head of the household, who's high up, who has to be connected to that person from the Esbet Rushdi stela. There's hairy pair on the Esbet Rushdi stela. The source, the reason why. This is the person to whom they connect themselves. So what this suggests to us is that Joseph, who is Sasobek and Khorramkhat Jr. on this inscription, serves as a type of umbrella, a protective umbrella, under which all of the people under him, and those are the family members of Jacob, have this protection under him. So what do they do on these inscriptions down at Serebit in Malkara? They use Joseph as their clout, as their connection, to show their involvement in Egyptian culture, that they are connected to someone who is of the highest rank in Egypt. Who is Sobek Amkhat? Again, we'll talk more about this in a future video, but he is Sa-Sobek, he is Khorramkhat Jr., and when you conflate the two into one, that name becomes Sobek Amkhat. That's the final name that Joseph has in Egypt. Finally, let's look at the oldest attested alphabetic letter, because this is what's going to connect us to the alphabet itself. Remember those stelae that we looked at, like Sinai 112 and Sinai 90 and so forth? Another one of them, composed by Manasseh, by Chebeded, he who was disfavored, is Sinai 115. At the bottom, once again, we have the drawing and the caption, but this time it's a very different caption. This caption reads like this: Ichinwi, and then the number 6. Ichinwi is the Levantine way to refer to Levantine people. What does that mean? It's not like Rechenu. Rechenu is the name that Egyptians give to Levantine people. Let me give you this example. I lived in Russia for 10 years. I knew people from Moscow. I called them Moskvichi in Russian. If I were talking to you, I wouldn't use that term. You wouldn't know what that means. But if I use the word Moscovites, if you know that word, you would know that that's the English word for people who live in Moscow. Moscovites is Moskvichi. So they're one and the same in meaning. You use one or the other depending on your purpose and your readership. This author wanted fellow Asiatic people, and I would say fellow Hebrews, to be able to read that these are Ichinwi people. These are people who are called while they're in the land Ichinwi. And there's 6 of them on this expedition. Look to the left now of those 6 vertical slashes. Starting with the feather, it reads Ivre, and then an N hieroglyph that makes the N sound. So N. Then below that is a word that's also horizontal from right to left. Gebitu. Gebitu, which means house of the earth god. House of the earth god. That was a sacred place for him. And later, God would have Jacob and his family move to that city. And Jacob called it the house of God. He called it the house of God. Jacob wrestled with whom? God, who brought himself to the earth to wrestle with a man. Jacob's grandson would connect Gebitu, the earth god, with God's appearance to Jacob to wrestle with him. Below this word is the word mer. This is the mer glyph. It means beloved. It's an adjective that modifies a noun, but just as with Spanish, the adjective follows the noun instead of preceding it, like with English. So it's Gebitu, it's Beth El, the house of God. It's Beth El, the beloved. It's kind of like with me. I was born and raised in Akron, Ohio. That's my beloved hometown. No matter where I go, no matter where I live, Akron, Ohio always will be home. It's my beloved home city of Akron. It's my beloved Akron. That's what this is. This is the beloved Beit El. In fact, this is the site where Jacob's family was living before God sent them down into Egypt. This is their homestead. This is the sacred city for Jacob's family. What's written above that is even more important, where it reads Ivre. Ivre, what's that? Hebrews of. It's in construct, and it's plural. It's a masculine plural in construct. Hebrews of Bethel, the beloved. Except that the middle pictograph in the word Hebrews of, Ivre, is not a hieroglyph. It's an alphabetic letter, which doesn't completely surprise me here that we would have a non-hieroglyph because we have another non-hieroglyph. If you look at what I've designated H3 here, further to the right in the word Ichinwi, it looks like an hourglass. That is a bronze ingot, but in fact, it's not a hieroglyph, not at all. It's a Canaanite syllabic, which means a syllable. Consonant W sound, vowel long I, E sound. We produces the sound we. Ichinwi. It's the we and Ichinwi. That is not a hieroglyph. So why is Chebeded writing this pictograph not in Middle Egyptian? I don't know. He doesn't tell us why. He does what he wants to do. But it tells us that he knows how to write Canaanite syllabics. It also shows us that somebody has invented the alphabet, because the second pictograph in the word Ivre, H7, 8, and 9, this is H8, is the alphabetic letter for the B sound in Hebrew, which is the Hebrew word bayit, which means house. What's the picture here? It's a house. In fact, go back in your mind to the writings of Chebeded earlier as he would write a house. He eventually evolved his writing of it to this very thing. It's a square, except it's a little bit longer, it's a little bit taller vertically. Exactly as he would write hieroglyphs, he wrote this for a house. But this isn't a hieroglyph. This is an alphabetic letter with an alphabetic sound. It's the B sound, which in the word Ivre goes from a B to a V. Hebrews of Bethel, the beloved hometown. Isn't this amazing? So this connects us through Ephraim and Manasseh, through Chebeded and Disobekemkat and Sobekemkat. It connects us between, on one hand, the Israelites, the sons of Jacob and the offspring of Jacob, and on the other hand, all of the archaeological evidence that we find at Avaris and down in Sinai. Now let's answer the question of who invented the world's first alphabet. Joseph's sons, Ephraim, Disobekemkat, and Manasseh, Chebeded, are the inventors of the first alphabet, which led to the very anglicized Latin script that you and I use today. In a future video, I will explain how the original alphabet was invented. Thank you for watching with me. I greatly look forward to seeing you next time on Illumining the Path. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I will see you next time. Bye.